that we do it correctly. But don't think that we're not making sure that we're keeping everybody protected. We have our strategy on prevent, which we hear tonight is fairly controversial, but it's still, I think, rescuing people, stopping people becoming radicalised. We have an intelligence service that works closely with the police, that is delivering results. 18 serious plots have been foiled by them since 2013. They do fantastic work to keep us safe. And we will take action, of course, where we see that there are terrorist or potential terrorist conversations. The intelligence services are doing their jobs well in order to do that.
But your answer to Shelley Blackson is you can't throw people out of the UK because they're suspected terrorists. But you do say in your Conservative manifesto we're going to consider new criminal offences that might be created to defeat terrorism. What kind of new criminal offences are you going to consider creating?
Well, it will depend what comes out of our various initiatives we've also put in there. We're going to have a commission on extremism to find out what else needs to be done. We want to tackle this in a way that I hope will engage the communities and be thoughtful about it as well. But terrorists, don't forget, also come from abroad, so we work internationally with other countries, with European partners, with other countries from farther afield, particularly trying to spot any returning foreign fighters to make sure they don't get into the country, as well as looking for them internally.
But British fighters who go abroad, of course, you can't do anything about when they come back,
we haven't,
unless you can prosecute them.
Yeah, well, we have a lot of tools at our disposal to try and make sure that we stop them coming back where we can, that if they do come back, we have the evidence in order to lock them up.
But on the point that you make, new criminal offences, from what I hear from you, you're not really thinking of new criminal offences at all. You're just saying you're going to consider it.
No, we are thinking about new criminal offences.
What kind of thing? What area?
I can't be drawn on that at the moment, I'm afraid, David.
Because you don't know the answer? Or
I do know the answer. I just don't want to have that discussion here. We're not being political. It would be difficult to have right here. But
all right.
There'll be more of that.
Sarah Khan, what do you make of the point that Shelley Blackson made, that we should be much rougher, tougher on suspected terrorists?
Well, I agree with the Home Secretary that when we're talking about suspected terrorists, the idea that we throw people out of our country is not the way we're going to defeat this problem. Look, we have to stand for our values. That includes the rule of law, standing for human rights. And I fundamentally believe that the best way we're going to win this battle against extremism is through the prism of human rights. We can't abandon our values. And already we are seeing people who are being convicted. There have been around 269 odd people who have been convicted between the period of, I think, 2005 and 2015. We've got to use our court system. And also, we've got to be very careful when we're saying, this person is a suspected terrorist. We've got to go through the rule of law, and I think that's really, really fundamental.
Do you want to come back on this, Shelley?
I just can't get over what happened on Monday. And had anybody known that he was capable of what he was capable of doing, And
I don't think there's a single person in this room who's not feeling what you're saying and does not have sympathy with what you're saying. But throwing them out is not the way of solving this problem. It's about dealing with having a multi-pronged strategy and we can counter this way in a much more effective manner.
Colin Perry?
If you want to throw them anywhere, throw them into my peace centre. And we'll work with them. And we'll take as long as it takes. We'll take as long as it takes to try and change the way they behave and the way they think. Now, you may think that's fanciful. It isn't. We've got ample evidence we can do it, and we don't play with people's minds. We just talk to them. We reintegrate them into British society as best we can. But you cannot abandon the rule of law and say you're suspected, off you go. You can't do it. That would cause major problems. But throw them our way.
All right. The woman in blue and white stripe, yes.
Hi there. First of all, I would like to say that my thoughts and prayers are with the victims and their families. I myself am a Muslim. I am a British Muslim and I'm very proud of my heritage. But I am also a realist, and there is an elephant in the room here, and unfortunately, it is very unfortunate, there is an issue with regards to radicalisation and extremism that does exist within our community. That is something that we have to accept and we have to deal with. I would like to go back to what the gentleman over there was saying when he referenced a mosque Yes, we do. We do have an issue within our mosques, within our religious institutions. We have children being taught the Wahhabi interpretation of the Quran. We have Saudi-trained clerics coming in and speaking to children as young as 7. You know, they have these books. You know, children are taught just. You know, we have to do something about it. Stop. I would say, for now, temporarily, close down all Saudi-financed mosques. And I, myself, as a Muslim, I'm a Muslim, so, you know, we have to do something about it, yes. Not to let that ingrained terrorists, you know, where terrorism is also being imported right under our noses.
There aren't any Saudi-funded mosques.
Yes, there are. Yes, there are.
Yes, there are.
Sorry, who said that there aren't what? Who's...
I'm saying
They're not officially.
Hold on.
There are.
Say it again, sorry, we didn't hear.
No Saudi-funded mosques in the UK. That's a misnomer. There used to be money that was brought in from abroad, but that has all stopped, and it stopped a long time ago.
Are there no Wahhabi preachers and no Saudi money at all? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Well, that's my knowledge. Certainly.
There are.
There are.
Yeah,
But
there are.
Wahhabi
I think there's a
preachers.
difference between Saudi money and Wahhabi preachers.
Yes.
I mean, there are Wahhabi preachers, no doubt. Can I just answer...
Can you pick up the point of the Muslim woman who said that you've got to face the fact that there is a lot of...
I'm 100%...
The language of
I'm 100%
radical
behind,
language is heard in the mosques.
I'm 100% behind her. Yeah. I don't go to any meeting, for example, which is just exclusively men. I ensure that if they invite me to a place of worship, there have to be women there. You have to change their behaviours. You've got to confront them when they are coming up with the kinds of things that you just identified yourself, because that's how, sadly, this generates even more hate. Yes. And how they generate difference as well, which is something that we've got to deal with. But at the same time, the communities themselves are taking action. They just need to do more. One of the things I'm doing, actually, is setting up a community COBRA, which is made up of not the usual suspects, but people perhaps like you might want to join, who are young, who understand the issues and work together to try and develop solutions. And I think that's what we need to do, because the problem with there is a deficit in Muslim leadership in this country. The vast majority of Muslims are now under 25, female and from low-income backgrounds. The leaders are male, over 50, from middle-class backgrounds. And there is that dislocation.
So how do you adjust that deficit?
Well, we stop talking, sadly, to people like me. You stop talking to the older generation, the people who claim that they're community leaders. The white community don't have community leaders. Why do we suddenly assume the minorities have community leaders? We start engaging with young people. We start talking to people in student land. We get them into the room and talk to them about how we can tackle this issue.
Very good.
More towards drug use and the criminalization of drug use. I know that you don't particularly condone drug use, but how do you feel about the criminal justice system, you know, with all these non-violent offenders, all the money that we spend on all the non-violent offenders and drug use openly? I mean, so maybe drug use is bad, but should we still criminalize it and treat those people the way that we do and lose money like that?
I am actually libertarian on drugs, so that means that... So let me be clear about this. People who smoke dope annoy the living crap out of me, and they smell terrible. That said, if you want to smoke dope and lose brain cells, then that's your problem, so long as you're not coming to me for a handout. I think that there are certain drugs, like, for example, PCP, that apparently makes you violent, and that has externalities. That's something that you have to talk about policing. You'd have to talk about policing in terms of, you know, selling drugs to minors. But it doesn't seem to me that when you're talking about things like marijuana, for example, you couldn't police marijuana in the same way that you police cigarettes or alcohol. You know, just make it very difficult to sell to people who are underage. The biggest problem that you have right now is that marijuana is so plentiful in places like California that even legalizing it is not going to get rid of the black market, because it actually, the price is higher in the legal market than it would be on the black market. So that's a serious problem, and suggests that deregulation is actually possibly a worthwhile thing. There are some, I'll admit that I'm split on some substances. Like, obviously, when you look at the opioid epidemic and you see the addictive level of that, marijuana is slightly different because the evidence for addictiveness in marijuana is mixed at best. But when you talk about opioids, which are actually addictive, the higher level regulation of opioids seems to me not inappropriate.
So to clarify my question, do you think that we should still be criminalizing these non-violent offenders in regards to, I mean, any drug?
Again, it depends on the offense. So if you're selling dope to a minor, yes, that should be criminal. If you are smoking dope in your room, then no, I don't think that should be criminal.
All right, thank you.
Like on another topic, I'm trying to decriminalize weed here in Pennsylvania and State College. I want to know what your opinion is. Weed, yay or nay?
So decriminalization of weed, yay, weed, nay. Okay, meaning that I'm libertarian when it comes to weed. I will also say that the no.
I'm not going to attack you, bro. I'm not going to attack you.
I didn't think you were going to. You're high. Weed's a downer. So in any case, so to finish the thought, I'm for decriminalization of weed, but I find people who smoke weed to be losers. So that's my brief summation. Because it kills your brain cells and it's a waste of time. Jordan says, with the Portugal experimenting of decriminalization of all drugs being moderately successful, is legalizing and regulating any or all drug sales a viable way to help combat the power and wealth of gangs in cities like Chicago? I'm not for using drugs just against the black market. So, I'm pretty libertarian when it comes to drugs. There are certain drugs that cause externalities, like PCP makes people violent. That should be illegal. But if you're talking about drugs that you just take and it makes you high and you ruin your life, that's really your business as long as I'm not paying for it. The big problem with decriminalization of drugs is you have to ensure that the decriminalized price of drugs is below the street market price of drugs. So one of the problems we have in California is you decriminalize marijuana, but the price that you get at the marijuana dispensary is still higher than black market marijuana, so people still buy on the black market. You haven't destroyed the black market. You just created a black market that is in competition with the real market. In order to really do this, it would work. Actually, decriminalization of drugs, there's a good case to be made that decriminalization of drugs would actually work better on the level of harder core drugs that are more expensive rather than cheaper drugs. That would actually be the case, the strong case, the economic case for decriminalization. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. Over the last couple of days, Joe Biden has been out there talking, and one of the things he's been talking about is what he likes to call the cancer moonshot. Well, I didn't know cancer was on the moon, but there you have it. So the cancer moonshot. This is the idea that we're going to spend inordinate amounts of federal money in order to research cancer treatments and end cancer. We'll listen to Joe Biden talk about it for a second, then I'll tell you what I don't like about this. Here's Joe Biden.
I've committed, and I promise before we leave, we will mow down any of the impediments that exist bureaucratically in the federal government to slow up the process.
So cooperation is one key. Money is a key. And I know that you've asked for $1 billion.
And we will get $1 billion because this is I've been doing this a long time. Mm-hmm. This is a truly bipartisan issue.
Okay, so it's a bipartisan issue. You'll get lots and lots of money. The barrier, there's always this idea on the left, and it's easy to fall into on the right too, that all the differences between us curing cancer and not curing cancer is just throwing money at the problem from a federal government perspective. It isn't true. It isn't true. There are certain areas in which the federal government is useful and good, although they screw it up a lot too, like vaccinations, for example, production of vaccinations during an emergency. There have been times in American history where we've gone into production on vaccines and it's been a complete waste of time, like in the 1970s. When it comes to cancer, first of all, people think of cancer as one disease. It isn't. It's an enormous spectrum of diseases. There are many different types of cancer. I'm speaking as somebody, my aunt died at 42 of cancer, of breast cancer. My other aunt had a preliminary double mastectomy because she was afraid of getting cancer. My grandfather died of cancer. My father has had a melanoma. Like, this is, this is something that everybody in the United States has experienced. What I'm saying here is I don't like the idea that government is God, and if we just give it enough power, it'll cure cancer for us. It's not true. Okay, what's actually going to cure cancer is not the kind of things the federal government is doing, but the things that the federal government hates on, like the pharmaceutical companies, the drug companies that actually produce the research that leads to practical results. So what the federal government does, they fund grants. My wife works in the medical industry. She's worked at a lab. This is true. They fund grants. The grants are for broad-based research. The idea is supposed to be that this broad-based research is then used to create the drugs that we use to treat the disease. That is very infrequent. Usually the way medicines are developed is that it's trial and error, right? This is why you have animal trials. It's not like, oh, we're going to go at it conceptually, a priori, blank slate. We just come in, tabula rasa, and we just create it out of our mind. Instead, what it is here's a cancer. We know it exists. Let's try a bunch of different things on it and see what works. That's how medicine is stumbling through the dark. Science is stumbling through the dark. That's why the scientific method of hypothesis and failure is the way it is. It's not come up with a great idea in your head and then later see if it works. It's We try it. If it fails, we come up with another hypothesis. If it fails, we come up with another hypothesis. So even from that perspective, the idea of mass federal funding is actually a relatively large waste of money. Certainly the idea of punishing pharmaceutical companies, which is so near and dear to Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton, and probably to Donald Trump as well. This idea is actually horrible because those pharmaceutical companies create the exact drugs that you are going to need if, God forbid, something happens.